welcome to In Parliament. The debate on Budget 2013 continued into its second day, with most speakers continuing to voice support for the measures introduced. Speakers from both sides of the House expressed satisfaction that the budget was an inclusive one that aims to build a better Singapore for all. Mo Main Kallang MP Denise Phua described the measures introduced as good and thoughtful and called it a budget with a heart. She also noted that the Our Singapore conversations had helped to shape the measures announced in the budget.
Solutions to these complex issues cannot be thought of and mandated by government alone. They need to be crafted with the inputs of Singaporeans, with as many of us understanding the nature of the hard truths that we face, and opt then for the best possible, sometimes painful solution, such as economic restructuring. Madam, I encourage fellow Singaporeans to join Phase 2 of our ongoing Singapore national conversations, to seek first to understand the issues and then to be understood, so that their aspirations and ideas will continue to be considered and reflected in future budgets.
Also calling it a noteworthy budget, MP for Aljunied GRC Pritam Singh said the budget signalled a policy shift. He said it was in line with the Workers' Party's belief that the government can do more for Singaporeans on the social front.
For the longest time, the state discourse in Singapore has eschewed any reference to welfare. Similarly, the state has tended to place meritocracy on a pedestal. In fact, the political leadership has tended to frame both issues in the extreme, with welfare representing the bad and meritocracy representing the good. However, this budget was noteworthy because meritocracy came with a caveat. The DPM's budget speech noted that meritocracy alone will not assure Singaporeans of social mobility, and that government policy seeks to level up children that come from poorer and less stable families. This is a significant statement, as it appears to premonition a shift in the state discourse. Equally noteworthy, the budget speech established that while overall healthcare expenditure will go up, government policy envisages a reduction in Singaporeans' out-of-pocket share of medical costs, with the government taking on a larger share.
But MP for Pasir Ris Punggol GRC Penny Low said she believed encouraging social mobility has been a cornerstone of the government's policies for a long time.
Please do not allow anyone to say that this government or the leadership has neglected this key objective of social mobility and inclusiveness. Perhaps what we need is a bigger, bolder vision to stir the soul. Could it look something like this? Could we say, set the target to send our poorest children up the socio-economic ladder, such that in 20 years, X number of children whose parents are in the bottom 30 percentile of today's income ladder would be amongst the top 30% of tomorrow's income ladder. Are we brave enough? Madam Speaker, let it be known that this House has, over the past 47 years with the PAP government, stood firm in its commitment to improve the lives of Singaporeans. Today, it is part and parcel of the Singaporean culture, spirit and ethos to uphold the ideal of an inclusive society. The market served us, and it should never be the other way around. Measure that, put it into our public service outcomes reviews that MOF conducts. Better still, adopt my proposal from last year's budget debate to properly develop a Singapore inclusive balance sheet and an index of well-being to institutionalize the fact that the PAP-led government puts citizens' well-being first.
Now, a key thrust of Budget 2013 was to help businesses restructure in a changing economic environment. The aim was to achieve not just growth, but quality growth, where better, higher-paying jobs would be available for Singaporean workers. But this raised concerns if firms could keep up with the pace of restructuring. MP for Ang Mo Kio GRC Inderjit Singh suggested the government recalibrate its 5-year productivity goal. He said the companies should start slow in the first 2 years and later speed up even faster than the current 5-year projection rate. Mr Singh said the country will still arrive at the same destination with the same goals outlined in the budget, but through a different route.
If after 2 years companies fail to restructure, despite the grace period given by the government, then they will face even greater challenges from the 3rd year onwards, and they will have to make even steeper changes as the rate of restructuring then becomes much more intense. And if they fail to restructure in the first 2 years, then I think it will be a fair proposition that the government cannot help any further because they failed to help themselves when they were given ample opportunities.
I would like to urge government to consider PIC beyond 2015. Based on feedback from SMEs who know how to make use of PIC, they feel that we should extend beyond 2015. I agree that cutting manpower, especially foreign manpower, is a right move in the push for higher productivity and to reduce reliance on foreign workers. However, I'm concerned that the pace of productivity increase may not match the cut in foreign workers. Workers and supervisors take time to learn and adopt new technologies. In fact, at this transition period, productivity will dip before it picks up. And we should give them more help rather than keep cutting.
Under the Productivity and Innovation Credit Scheme, a gamut of IT and automation equipment qualify for enhanced deduction or allowances. The list includes what many would regard as basic or essential equipment in today's workplaces, such as computers, mobile phones, PDAs. Isn't this a simplistic understanding of productivity, or are we promoting a simplistic understanding of productivity? Equipment do not necessarily change behavior. It is practice and mindset and leadership that changes behavior.
To alleviate the problems associated with restructuring, the wage credit scheme was introduced to help companies transition. While many threw support behind the scheme, there were some who suggested several ways to improve on it.
Hence, the budget's progressive wage tax is timely, as is the wage credit scheme to help businesses raise wages for Singaporean workers. And I applaud the enhancement of the Workfare Income Supplements, especially for older workers. Whilst many of our older workers' lowest paid work is in the cleaning and security industry, I believe more can be done to encourage innovation and productivity growth in these two sectors. I think the users of these cleaning and security services may need to be persuaded to reward contracts based not just on costs or number of workers used, but also be receptive to the application of new technologies.
The centerpiece of this year's budget is the 3.6 billion wage credit scheme. I'm especially appreciative of this scheme, as it is a very good example of unconventional thinking. The wage credit scheme achieves two main objectives, and that is to help businesses mitigate costs and uplift incomes of Singaporean workers, while at the same time leaving efficient allocation of resources to the market. This scheme, in my view, is superior to a minimum wage scheme because it minimizes distortionary effects to the economy. If businesses are in a position to raise wages, government will step in with help. If businesses are not in a position, then workers will leave to more efficient and profitable businesses to work. Businesses will also have to think hard between employing a foreign worker versus using those resources to encourage the local worker to be more productive. But the point is that in all these scenarios, the workers benefits from being in a position to achieve a higher wage. The wage increase would go directly to him, and businesses are given help for 3 years to restructure their operation.
With the new direction, lower dependency ratio, higher levy, stricter manpower regulations, a new reality is upon us. This move, while challenging now in the initial stage, will serve to help us to do better, be more productive, innovative, self-reliant, and with better skill. I urge employers to take on the challenges and the government to support efforts. Most importantly, we must go for quality and not quantity, value every worker in this transition and transformation process.
Weighing in on the hotly discussed wage credit scheme, Labour Chief Lim Swee Say said companies have at least 3 options to choose from. The first, to not increase wages and risk losing workers in the current tight labour market. The second, to increase wages without making any changes to its operations. Mr Lim said if companies were to use the wage credit scheme to lower wage costs, they would return to square one in 3 years when the scheme is up. He warned that is when companies would face even greater challenges. Mr Lim said the third option is for companies to take full advantage of not just the wage credit scheme, but the total offerings under the transitional support package. He said this is the preferred option for the labour movement.
At the end of the day, it's important for companies to recognize that as we enter this new stage of development, in fact, the bottleneck of the Singapore economy the bottleneck faced by all businesses is now the bottleneck of manpower. The limiting factor of the Singapore economy as we move ahead is actually manpower. So given this situation, a wise thing to do, a logical thing to do, obviously, is to try to break this manpower bottleneck by making best use of every worker, every person. Of course, for many SMEs, one of the challenges they face is that you can invest in your productivity today, but it may take another 1 year, 2 years before you realize the gain again. In the meantime, what do you do? Yeah. In fact, I think this is where the wage credit scheme comes in. Because of the wage credit scheme, the government is now co-funding the sharing of the productivity gain, even before the gain is fully realized by the companies. So we really hope that more companies will make full use of both the PIC, the WCS, and all their programs to ensure that they can invest in productivity gain and share the gain.
Mr Lim further emphasised the importance of raising productivity. He said it was key to achieving quality growth and a better Singapore.
The second aspiration for many Singaporean workers is that the better Singapore must be and will be inclusive of all Singaporeans and progressive for all Singaporeans. We like to see a broad-based upgrading in terms of skills, productivity, career and wages, so that all Singaporeans can have better jobs, better pay, and live a better life. We'd like to see a Singapore where we all respect each other, care for each other, and work together with each other. But most importantly, we'd like to see a Singapore where we as one people, we live not just in one nation, but more importantly, we live together in one same world. Why do we say that? Singapore has made the transition from third world to first. I think we often say that. But from the workers' point of view, there are still many jobs today that are stuck, that remain in the second world and the third world. We have to change them for the better and change them fast.
And in seeking better jobs, several MPs highlighted the plight of Singaporeans who they say continue to face unfair competition from foreign workers.
There are clearly still a number of firms that have visibly hired a large proportion of foreigners, particularly in the managerial level. You can't help but think whether it's really that difficult to find Singaporeans to fill these managerial positions. These include jobs like HR, finance, compliance, auditing, or general admin. Or is it a case where some of the employers or the hirers merely have predetermined mindsets that foreigners with international experience can do a better job? More engagements with such employers are necessary so that Singaporeans are given a fair chance. Hence, I agree with my colleagues here in this House that some form of market sensing practices when company applies for EPs are necessary. While it may not always lead to a Singaporean hire, at least it makes the employers more conscious in the hiring process and give our local PMEs a chance.
Employers, as a responsible corporate citizen, should abide by values such as fairness. This is the case in recruitment drive as well. Employers need to play their parts to ensure that the qualification, training, and skills required of local workers are the same as that required of the foreign workers. At the end of the day, I believe that we need to secure migrant workers with the right technical skills as well as the social adaptability to coexist with our locals who are their co-workers. These will in turn help us focus on productivity and continual improvement to build a bigger pie of the economy pie for all to share, and more importantly, to ensure that the benefits of growth in terms of job opportunities and salary will flow to Singaporeans. One area that the government should look into is review the entry-level employment pass. We must ensure that employers give fair opportunity to fresh graduates of our local polytechnics and universities.
One of the biggest stumbling blocks for our fresh job seekers is what I call an experience trap. A significant number of young graduates that I spoke to recently expressed their disillusionment at the lack of opportunity. This seemingly runs counter to the employees' market that we are supposed to be experiencing. The hurdle, simply put, is employers require minimum years of experience for applicants to get a job. It is an oxymoronic situation. If young job entrants are not given an opportunity, then they will never get the experience required of them. I urge the government to consider more measures for young job entrants to better protect them over the next 3 years. I agree with the Honourable Member, Mr Patrick Tay, that protecting a Singapore core for PMEs, especially for young PMEs, through robust labour market testing may be required.
The issue of imposing a minimum wage policy was also touched on. The Labour chief said Singapore has been studying the minimum wage approach carefully for many years, and the conclusion was that there's no one way of implementing the system. Mr Lim Swee Say said Singapore has been able to settle on a model today, which includes the Workfare Income Supplement, Workfare Training Scheme and Progressive Wage Model.
Just last year, we introduced the Progressive Wage System, whereby we finally pulled together 4 factors: the skill, productivity, career path, as well as wages of the workers. And with the WIS, WTS and progressive wage model, we believe we have now a minimum wage model. In fact, it's more than minimum wage model, whereby we can actually maximize the upside for the low wage workers and at the same time minimize the downside.
The debate on the budget also saw more calls to improve the quality of life for Singaporeans. Several members made suggestions on how a better work-life balance could be achieved.
The setting up of this commission will signal a commitment to look into the complex issue of work-life balance, taking into consideration the needs of not just businesses, but the larger society. The objective of this commission would be to lead public discussions on family-friendly work practices, develop research, and promote global best practices to enhance work-life balance, and to develop pro-family business practices resources to help businesses shift towards a more pro-family environment. It is simply because the issues are complex that we should dedicate sufficient time and resources to look into solutions in depth for the long term and not go for the one-size-fits-all approach.
Flexi-work can also help to ease congestion on our public transport and roads. I support the call by Honourable Member Janil Puthucheary yesterday for free travel on public transport before peak hours. However, for a deep cultural shift, this move needs to be accompanied with flexi-work. If workers go to work at 7:30 a.m., they should be able to leave work by 3:30 p.m. Otherwise, it will just mean longer work hours and not necessarily in a productive way.
In my constituency, I continue to meet many ex-offenders and back-to-work women who face challenges to return to the workforce. Some have shared that employers tell them the cost of having to make adjustment to hiring them is not viable. For example, they may have to create a more flexible work schedule, create a mentoring system, and job seekers also share that they find it challenging or costly sometimes to attend courses, and there are obstacles that they face along the way. Perhaps the Minister can consider bundling some of such support services together so that the job seekers are trained before they are sent to the employers, and employers are prepared in their workplace with certain incentive schemes to receive this group of job seekers.
More support was also thrown behind the introduction of an even more progressive tax system.
A high income gap could be potentially destabilizing for our society, but we are better placed to address this than almost any other country. Why? A, we have husbanded our resources for just such a time. B, we have more reserves and surpluses that can be put to work. And C, we are more open and international, allowing us to benefit from global opportunities. We have saved for a rainy day. This is the rainy day, because how we handle the transition of the next 10 years will make or break us. Doing a little more with our surpluses to achieve a redistributive agenda is not a bad thing. A progressive tax rate is appropriate, as are policies that encourage the private sector to participate in this effort.
I propose the introduction of a do-good tax that will compel the most wealthy and successful to contribute more to the tax chest. Specifically, I propose a 1% increase in income tax payable for every $500 million of taxable income above $500,000 Sing. Persons earning above $500,000 to $1 million taxable income to contribute 1%, an additional 1% for every $500,000 additional income bracket, up to a maximum of 25% rate. This is still lower than in many other countries.
On the topic of transport, several MPs rose to support the proposal to grant free public transport for those travelling before peak hour. MP for Pasir Ris Punggol GRC Dr. Janil Puthucheary mooted this idea in Parliament yesterday to help ease congestion during peak period.
After hearing Dr. Janil's speech yesterday, I did a little research and found out that indeed in Melbourne's Metro, the city metropolitan train operator, they do offer weekday free fares for early birds before 7 a.m. in the city zones. We should study this, the Melbourne experience. Even a shift of, say, 10% of commuters from peak to non-peak will make a great deal of difference and ease crowdedness. However, I would want to caution that even as we give free fares for the non-peak window, it should not come at the expense of the other groups of commuters or cross-subsidize the other groups of commuters. It should be funded from other revenue sources such as the collections from the COEs, car taxes, and the ERPs.
Flexi-work can also help to ease congestion on our public transport and roads. I support the call by Honourable Member Janil Puthucheary yesterday for free travel on public transport before peak hours. However, for a deep cultural shift, this move needs to be accompanied with flexi-work. If workers go to work at 7:30 a.m., they should be able to leave work by 3:30 p.m. Otherwise, it will just mean longer work hours and not necessarily in a productive way.
Addressing the issue of integration of foreigners in Singapore, Mr. Hari Kuman Nair proposed a national defence tax on non-citizens as a way of sharpening distinctions between citizens and non-citizen residents and using the proceeds to benefit NS men.
We cannot force people to remain in Singapore who do not want to stay here, but we can make it so costly that they would think twice or 3 times before taking PR status or arranging for their child to dodge NS. We should have new citizens and PRs perform some form of compulsory service. If NS is not suitable by reason of age or other circumstances, other forms should be introduced. This can be for short periods annually, much like how Singaporean men do reservist training. The point is not to discourage foreigners from sinking their roots here, but to emphasize that they now have a stake in the country as well.
Now, while most of the debate on the budget so far has been centred on the policies and measures introduced, MP for Potong Pasir Sito Yipin took a different tack. He approached his budget speech with suggestions for the government to be upfront with Singaporeans about the bad news in managing their expectations. Mr. Sito said this could include the fact that some graduates will never live in private housing because 85% of housing are HDB flats, or that there is still a need for foreign labour to care for the elderly over the next 20 years, even if the country's total fertility rate goes up to 2.1% suddenly. Mr. Sito said managing expectations helps the government to build trust.
The currency of politics is trust. While we must strive to improve on our performance, we also need to get down to the difficult business of managing expectations. Expectation is a spectrum. Most politicians only talk about the higher end of the spectrum, the lofty things that are nice to hear. But as responsible politicians governing Singapore, we will have to be honest and we will have to communicate the bad news, the harsh realities that each and every Singaporean has to face sooner or later.
During question time, Deputy Prime Minister Teo Chee Hean said Singapore's ageing population issue is a one-off problem that resulted from having a very large baby boomer generation from the early 1950s to mid-60s. He said it is necessary to make preparations for the future to ensure Singapore's seniors are able to look after themselves and are well looked after by their children and by the nation in the coming 2 decades. Nominated MP Assistant Professor Eugene Tan asked Mr Teo how the government is planning to get Singaporeans' buy-in for the population White Paper and Land Use Plan. Professor Tan also asked whether the government will provide regular updates on its progress in addressing Singapore's demographic challenge.
We will continue to study options and engage Singaporeans on population and its related issues on multiple fronts, including through our Singapore Conversation and other forums. As we continue to engage Singaporeans and work together on policies, address and overcome the specific and practical problems we face, and deliver on programs to benefit Singaporeans, we hope to strengthen trust and consensus among Singaporeans on the future that we must build together. The government will continue to provide regular updates on the progress of proposals in the Population White Paper and Land Use Plan through the release of studies, reports and announcements. We are also working towards a medium-term review before 2020.
The budget debate resumes tomorrow. Good night.